So I wrote an essay called Technopoly, and that was like basically about Neil Postman's idea that, when a new technology gets introduced, it is an ecological change, like environmental scientists talk about. It's not good or bad or neutral. It just it changes literally everything. So in that regard, technology, we've grown up with technology now, and it's all ever pacing. But now there's been some resurgence of people not exactly pushing back, but then other alternatives and stuff, and working with that. So I want to kind of talk about technological optimism, technological pessimism, and that kind of distinction. Yeah. And then maybe even what you were talking about a second ago, or alluded to, technological realism. It's like, what exactly is that and stuff? And then some of the thinkers maybe that are along that, Wendell we've talked a lot about on Twitter, maybe some other influences of who else, is kind of used to revitalize the culture in that way, technologically,
Yeah. Well, so I do see this as a kind of fundamental fault line in kind of ideologies that I see online of like, kind of a techno-optimistic point of view. And I think it's just kind of implicit. Like, for example, when I see what are called the post-rats online, like they don't mention it, but it just seems implicitly that they're kind of techno-optimists. Like they're just like, they kind of assume that the future is through technology, the singularity is going to happen, and we're going to deal with that, and we're going to get nuclear energy going, and our energy problems will be solved, and our climate problems will be solved. Like that just seems to kind of be like a default assumption, even if it's not so explicitly stated. As opposed to, for example, I would say the bioregionalists, who are much more skeptical that we can keep relying on technological breakthroughs to solve the problems that prior technological breakthroughs have created for ourselves.
Absolutely.
Right? And it's like we've been playing this high wire game for a long time, and from the bioregionalist point of view, like time is starting to run out. Like we're running out of planet to keep playing this game, right? And so and that's kind of the direction I think I've started to lean towards, of being more skeptical of this kind of rapid, because like you said, with technological change, you get like kind of changes everything, cultural change, and like what Wendell gives voice to is just the immense amount of loss, cultural loss that we've had through this kind of restructuring of the economy in the last 50 to 70 years, right? And not just cultural loss, but ecological devastation, right? And that also came from kind of this kind of like modernist, kind of progressive, technocratic kind of optimism or faith, right? And so,
faith is a good word there. Yeah, faith is a real good word.
And a lot of it, I think, and I think I can say this because I think I used to be more in this camp as well. Of like, I just kind of assumed by default that we would invent our way out of a lot of the like technology would be the solutions. And when I started reading like Joe Brewer and just getting this kind of very starkly different perspective of like, no, like this is all collapsing and we're preparing for what's coming after that. Like that was kind of like a splash of cold water, right?
Like it's already a non-starter that this is happening. We're already planning after it. And people keep discussing that, and it's like, no, we need to move on from that.
Right, and so at the end of the day, now I try, especially talking with students, and like I try and keep myself as open-minded as possible, even though my bias is clearly towards more kind of landed-based kind of sensibility and living. I try not to close myself off from like technological event that we might need, right?
Sure.
So, for example, I think nuclear energy here is a good example, or like fusion technology. I think, I try to, we don't know if, for example, fusion energy is going to come online in time to really make a difference before we have some kind of collapse.
And it's
situation.
been on the eve for decades.
For decades, and that's the thing. But when I catch myself saying, or thinking like, I don't want it to come online because that will just kind of accelerate kind of the consumeristic culture that will cause other kind of ecological. I try and stop myself and be like, okay, like perhaps this would be a good thing because it would perhaps it would save a lot of lives. But then so I try and integrate kind of a techno-optimist perspective in my point of view. But
so that you don't
whenever I can, even though I tend to be skeptical.
So you're making sure that at least for you I like that because obviously you're not letting anything in your things are going to fall through the cracks, but you're trying as best to not let that happen. Which is like that being open is huge, but then having a set kind of way of thinking is also huge as well. You know, it's like I don't know which one is better or not. You know?
Right. So for example, next week in my class, we're going over the future of energy. Right.
Okay.
And so I'm going to start with, you know, I've thought a lot about how I want to present this. Right. Taking my own bias or sensibility in mind, and it's like, okay, I'm going to start with just presenting like, here are all the kind of alternative energy technologies out there. Here are the pros and cons. You know, solar panels, wind turbines, you know, nuclear energy, geothermal, like all of this stuff, and present that and say, hey, like, you know, we should probably get off of fossil fuels, and so these are some alternatives. But then, you know, I'm going to, you know, present material from, for example, like the Post Carbon Institute, the author Richard Heinberg, who basically says like, yeah, we need to get off fossil fuels, we need to go to renewable energy technologies, but you know, it's not going to power our society in the same way. We're probably not going to be able to maintain this high energy consumeristic society. And so what does that mean? How do we pre-adapt to you know, probably a lower energy future according to Richard Heinberg, but also, you know, but the energy will also be very different, right? Like it'll be, you know, more flows instead of stocks, so to speak. You know, like the structure of the economy that we're used to is built around fossil fuels. And so, for example, like how do you make cement or steel with electricity? It's extremely difficult.
I see,
right?
like generators or this or that or whatever.
And so
it's
you know, and so like, yeah, sure, we can try and electrify everything, but you know, it's going to be. I think people don't like that, and we might invent our way out of these tough challenges, but I think people don't like. They just kind of like have this vague notion of like, okay, we'll just switch to nuclear, solar, or something, and it'll be fine. It's much more difficult than people realize. Like once you actually get into, and it'll imply a lot of change about how we structure society, right? And so you know, so that's where the realism comes in. Of like, even if we do, and then you know, I think folks like Ashley she's more skeptical than me about like, you know, renewable energy technologies. Like she's more of a Rathognon, you know, proponent of like, you know, like all of this kind of high tech stuff is just fragile, and I sympathize with that point of view as well. But I don't think I'm as further along, you know, I'm not as Rathognon pilled as some people. But I do think that, you know, a lot of the way, you know, a lot of new technology is incredibly wasteful, and so a lot of these kind of traditional patterns and traditional, say, building techniques and you know, traditional agricultural techniques, we need to recover, right? We need to actually learn from the past again and bring it forward into the future.
In his specifically, I've loved the architectural stuff because I had not even known anything about that. And it's like, what is brutalism? What is this and stuff? And then all of a sudden, you look around, and we live in Los Angeles, obviously. Yeah. The architecture that Rathognon hates the most is all around us.
Right. Like you probably wouldn't be that interested in geodesic domes either.
No.
Speaking of Bucky Fuller,
Speaking of.